Saw a 30-year-old guy who came in with complaint of chest pain. Saw a 30-year-old guy who came in with complaint of chest pain. After seeing and examining him, his story sounded like dirt, but cardiac workup was started. Got called away from the module to deal with a teenager who was shot and ended up dying. When I got back, the guy's mom was there and was irate that I hadn't been in to talk to her in the 15 minutes since she arrived. I tried to explain that his workup had already been started. There were other patients in the department who also needed my attention, and many of whom were far more sick. She lost it, basically said she didn't care about anyone else, and her son was the only one who matters. She wouldn't calm down, and was eventually escorted out by security. Nurse here. My colleague was discharging a patient, and, in the process, asked if he needed his parking validated. He sneered at her and responded, "I really am on the board of this hospital. I do not need your validation to do anything." Oh. Turns out he was a local philanthropist and multimillionaire, and I guess we were supposed to know that. I'm an EMT, not a doctor. Had a patient once who shriekingly demanded a back massage to calm her nerves. She did not get one. Also of note was the fact that there was nothing detectably physically wrong with her. Resident doctor. I was working on a surgical ward taking care of the post-op patients. Surgeon calls me to tell me I need to send a script for oxycodone to a young patient who was sent home from theater directly after minor surgery. I have the script faxed over to the pharmacy of the patient. Angry dad calls me next day saying his son is out oxycodone and I need to give him another script. I tried to reason with him that if Hella's using that much oxycodone he needs medical review before he can be issued another script. Dad would not have it. Said I did not do my job as a doctor to take care of his kid after the surgery. He then proceeded to file a formal complaint against me. All I did was give his kid a script and told him to see his family doctor if he needs more pain relief. Somehow I had the gut feeling that the patient was not the one taking the oxycodone. During my surgery rotation in medical school, I was, peripherally, involved in a trauma code in the emergency room. The trauma victim was intubated, had 2 chest tubes, blood everywhere. By the time it progressed to pericardiocentesis, a needle onto the sac of the heart to remove any blood outside the heart, but in the pericardium, that can be the cause of cardiac arrest in trauma. A lady grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the trauma bay, yelling at me that her daughter in the room next door was cold and needed a blanket. Not my last encounter with entitled patients and families, but one of the most memorable. They believed feeding and clothing her was sufficient for normal development. My dad told me when I was younger that some parents just kept their kids alive. They didn't really raise them. I didn't understand exactly what he meant until I went into my profession and became a mother myself. There are parents who do the absolute bare minimum and have this disconnected relationship with their children. It is bizarre to watch. My bitchy side also notices they paint themselves as wonderful, loving parents on social media too, but their apathy and lack of meaningful interaction says otherwise. My mother had a friend who was that child. Her mother took her to the doctor and told him something was wrong with her kid because she should be talking at this point. Doc asked her how much she was talking to her child and the woman couldn't understand why on earth she'd do that. She told the doctor that she mostly put the kid somewhere where she wouldn't bother her and went about her day. I don't think it was really anything malicious. She just wasn't interested and didn't see any reason in speaking to a person who can't answer back. I've done the opposite of this with the same result. My youngest didn't start speaking until late 2, almost 3. I figured out that she didn't speak because we all spoke for her. Her needs were being met without her needing to ask. So as an example, if she wanted milk, she'd give me her milk supply, and I'd get her milk. Once I figured it out, she had to say the words before I'd do anything for her. Now she talks from the moment she gets up until she goes to sleep. Their fears are understandable though. They want what is best for their child. It's a fine line to walk. My wife a surgeon in the trauma department and always talked about how insane family members, especially parents, can act in the emergency room. Then our second born needed open heart surgery as an infant. Prior to the surgery my wife asked more questions than I thought possible, and during the surgery she asked for updates every 5 minutes. She said his 3.5-hour surgery felt longer than the 12-hour surgeries she performed. Our kid recovered fine, and is now an active accident-prone athlete who has spent more than his fair share of time in doctors' offices and hospitals. At this point my wife just shrugs it off, and takes more of a, "but did you die?" approach when he comes home injured, but his surgery as an infant made her a lot more grateful for everything you guys deal with in pediatrics. Crazy parents are not fun. Talking about wanting the best for their child in adult ears, while they are rolling in dad as he clutches his chest, sweating profusely and with a look of anguish and shock on his face. Yes, years of smoking, eating fat and carrying excess gut around did finally catch up to you. His daughter is rushing through the doors screeching as loud as possible, "This is my daddy and spare no expense. Do whatever it takes. I want my daddy back." A week later when that spare no expense bill arrives, the same daughter is back rushing through the doors, screeching just as loud saying, "WTF is this? $7 freaking for an aspirin." The mother was extensively interviewed for long-term postpartum depression. Both were screened for mental health or domestic issues. Ultimately they were right, they just weren't interested. The child hadn't been planned, and they just weren't deeply invested in the child-parent relationship. The child was otherwise well looked after in this upper middle class family, but was utterly emotionally neglected. They believed feeding and clothing her was sufficient for normal development. It was bizarre and entitled behavior. And that's how you get Doc Martin. When my son was an infant, he was hospitalized for 4 days. The baby in the next room had been there 4 weeks. I never left my child's side, except to shower, and I didn't see one visitor next door. When my boy was sleeping, I'd go in and keep that baby company. He was maybe around a year old, and I'd read to him, or play peekaboo. I felt so bad for him. I was just an 18-year-old kid and still a better parent than the one he got saddled with.